What is a record deal? Up until recently, signing a record deal was pretty much the only, or certainly the best, chance that an artist had of getting their music heard by a large audience. This situation has changed in the age of social media and music streaming, but there are still many advantages to getting signed. In this video, we will briefly discuss what a record deal is, and why a record deal can be helpful to artists. To understand what a record deal is, we need to start by discussing the notion of intellectual property and copyright. Intellectual property, or IP, is essentially something created with your mind. For a musician, the most obvious example of this is coming up with an idea for a song. Once you have that idea, a natural next step is to make a recording of that song, perhaps at home on your laptop, or maybe by hiring a recording studio. At this point, you now likely own the copyright to the recording that you've made. The copyright, in simple terms, refers to the right to make copies of this recording. In the UK, the default copyright owner of a recording is the person who paid for the costs of making that recording. As mentioned in our video, What is a Record Label?, the rights relating to recordings in the music industry are typically called the master rights, because of the way that recordings used to be replicated in the days of physical records. But what if you didn't have the money to hire a recording studio, or didn't have adequate recording equipment at home to make commercial quality music? Or what if you didn't know how to promote a record and couldn't afford to hire someone to help? What if you didn't have the contacts to get your record in the relevant stores, both online and in the real world? This is where record companies can step in and help by offering you a record deal. A record deal is an agreement between a record label and an artist whereby that artist agrees to make a certain number of recordings for the record label to exploit. They can do this by making the recordings available to stream, or by creating physical copies to sell. They could also make money by licensing the record to other companies, perhaps to use in a movie, television show, or an advert. Similarly, if the recording is played in public, perhaps on an in-store playlist or at a bar on a jukebox, then they are entitled to collect some revenue for the use of that recording. To take advantage of all of these different revenue streams, or royalties, the record label will usually provide the artist with the financial means to record and promote their music, and in exchange, the label takes ownership of the master rights of the recording, allowing them to exploit the copyright in the ways just mentioned. The record deal will spell out the key points of agreement between the label and artist as it relates to the recordings they intend to make. For instance, the contract will stipulate which territories the label holds the master rights in. This could be worldwide, or it could be restricted to specific countries. Similarly, the record deal will be stated to last for a certain length of time. This could be a fixed period of time, for instance a 15-year term, or it could even be in perpetuity, in other words forever. The deal will also state how many recordings are part of the deal, perhaps a certain number of tracks or a certain number of albums. It is not unusual for a record deal to give the label an option to extend this agreement further by obligating the artist to a further album or set of recordings, should the label so choose. It is important that an artist think carefully about which terms they agree to in their record deal, as this can impact their future release options significantly. In exchange for making the recordings for the label, the artist will be compensated financially. This compensation is paid out of the royalties generated by exploiting the master recordings, and the precise royalty rate must be negotiated between the artist and the label prior to signing the record deal. Historically, artists have received a minority share of royalties, with many artists receiving as little as a 15% royalty share. This has increased in recent years, but has coincided with a drop in revenue generated by recorded music. It is imperative then that a record label adds substantial value to the release of the record, otherwise the artist has limited incentive to sign a record deal at all. So how do labels add this value? The first way might be by financing time for the artist to create music. Many artists work part-time or even full-time in some other job, and create music essentially as a hobby. However, a record deal can change this equation for an artist by offering them an advance. An advance is an upfront payment of the artist's share of royalties made prior to the release of the record. Being paid in this way might allow the artist to reduce their working hours or perhaps quit their job entirely. However, since this is an advanced payment, it ultimately needs to be recouped by the label once the record starts generating revenue. This means that the label will not make any further payments, at least until the artist's share of royalties equals the amount advanced to them. In this way, an advance is a kind of soft loan, made in good faith that the recordings will generate enough income for the label to not end up out of pocket. However, this doesn't always happen, or it can take a long time to happen. As such, this means that the label ends up losing money, and the artist does not see any further payment of note from the label for the recordings that they made, From the label's perspective, they hope that their roster on the whole is successful. In other words, enough of their clients are profitable to allow them to take risks on other artists who might not be. It is worth noting that not all record labels offer advances in the way described, and it is not always something that an artist needs or wants. Sometimes it is better for an artist not to take an advance, or to ask only for a small advance, in order to push for better terms elsewhere in the deal, such as their royalty rate or a shorter contract duration. As mentioned earlier, the person who pays for the recording owns the masters. However, it's not uncommon for record deals to ultimately put the cost of recording and promoting the record at the artist's door. In doing so, the deal is structured so that these costs are recouped from the artist's share of revenue, which means that the artist ultimately pays for the recordings as well as the costs of marketing the release. These costs are added to any advance, pushing up the amount of money that a record needs to make before the artist receives any further royalty payment. This is often the source of artists' complaints about record companies, since these costs may never be recouped and the artist might therefore never receive payment related to that recording. The answer obviously depends on the situation of the artist and whether they are able to achieve a better result working independently. Could they make the record cheaper and generate a similar level of success? If so, then there may not be a good reason to sign a record deal. If not, then perhaps the best chance the artist has of success is by using the label's network of contacts, in distribution, in music PR, and in radio plugging, to get the record in front of as many people as possible. With this in mind, a record deal might also include some money for tour support, funding to pay for an artist to go on tour in order to promote the release to as many people as possible. All of these things that a record deal can pay for, from recording to touring, the costs that the artist would likely have to cover themselves if they want to try and earn a living from their music. A record deal, therefore, can be a good option for an artist who only has a limited budget to promote their music independently. In an age where streaming revenue isn't likely to ultimately fund all of these costs, many artists will still likely need label support for the foreseeable future. However, any artist considering signing a record deal needs to make themselves aware of the implications, financial or otherwise, of the deal that they're signing.